Mitanni, also called Hanigalbat or Hani-Rabbat in Assyrian or Naharin in Egyptian texts, was a Hurrian-speaking state in northern Syria and southeast Anatolia. Currently there are two hypotheses regarding how Mitanni was formed. First theory, Mitanni was already a powerful kingdom at the end of the 17th century or in the first half of the 16th century BC, and its beginnings are from before the time of Thutmose I, so dated to the time of the Hittite sovereigns Hattusili I and Mursili I, when the middle chronology is applied. Second theory, Mitanni came to be due to a political vacuum in Syria, which had been created first through the destruction of the kingdom of Yamhad by the Hittites and then through the inability of Hatti to maintain control of the region during the period following the death of Mursili I. If the second hypothesis is considered, Mitanni could have come to be a regional power after the Hittite destruction of Amorite Babylon occurred in 1531, and a series of ineffectual Assyrian kings created a power vacuum in Mesopotamia. While the Mitanni kings and other members of royalty bore names resembling Indo-Aryan phonology, they used the language of the local people, which was at that time a non-Indo-European language, Hurrian. Their sphere of influence is shown in Hurrian place names, personal names and the spread through Syria and the Levant of a distinct pottery type. The beginning. The Mitanni kingdom began, as Mirko Novak claims, a little after 1600 BCE, during the Old Babylonian period, at least 2 generations before the sack of Babylon by the Hittites, which Novak considers to have been in 1522 BC, when a certain king of the Hurrians, in all likelihood one of the first Mitanni rulers, appeared as one opponent of Hattusili, but, as new excavations and radiocarbon datings in Zincirli-Hoyuk confirm the middle chronology for Hittite king Hattusili I, the beginning of Mitanni realm can also be suggested to have taken place around the mid-17th century BCE. The sack of Zincirli-Hoyuk could have been part of Hattusili I's campaign against Salpa in order to disrupt an exchange network connected to Aleppo that previously linked the Euphrates, North Syria, and central Anatolia. As recent archaeological excavations suggest, early Mitanni's territory could have also been to the east of Upper Tigris River, as a town now called Basaki was excavated in northern Iraq, which in all likelihood was the ancient town of Mardama with Mitanni layers from 1550 to 1300 BCE. As its phase A9 may alternatively represent a Middle Bronze/Late Bronze transitional, or Proto-Mitanni occupation within 16th century BCE. In a subsequent excavation season, the deeper phase A10 was identified as having a mix of Middle Bronze and Mitanni potteries, considered to be in the turn of the Middle to the Late Bronze Age transitional period. Archaeologically, Mitanni's first phase in Jazira region features Lake Kuberware from around 1600 to 1550 BCE. As this pottery was a continuity from non-Mitannian previous Old Babylonian period. From around 1550 to 1270 BCE, painted Nuzi ware developed as a contemporary to younger Kuberware. At least since around 1550 BCE, in the beginning of Late Bronze Age, painted Nuzi ware was identified as a characteristic pottery in Mitanni sites. The origin of this decorated pottery is an unsolved question, but a possible previous development as Aegean commerce ware has been suggested by Pekarelia, and S. Soldi claims that Tel Brak was one of the first centers specializing in the production of this painted Nuzi ware, and analyses on samples support the assumption that it was produced locally in various centers throughout the Mitanni kingdom. It was particularly appreciated in the Jazira region, but appears only sporadically in western Syrian cities such as Alalak and Ugarit. At the beginning of its history, Mitanni's major rival was Egypt under the Thutmosids. However, with the ascent of the Hittite Empire, Mitanni and Egypt struck an alliance to protect their mutual interests from the threat of Hittite domination. At the height of its power, during the 15th and the first half of 14th century BCE, a large region from northwest Syria to the eastern Tigris was under Mitanni's control. Mitanni had outposts centered on its capital, Washukani, whose location has been determined by archaeologists to be on the headwaters of the Khabur River. The Mitanni dynasty ruled over the northern Euphrates-Tigris region between circa 1600 and 1350 BCE. Eventually, Mitanni succumbed to Hittite and later Assyrian attacks and was reduced to the status of a province of the Middle Assyrian Empire between circa 1350 and 1260 BCE. Geography. The Mitanni controlled trade routes down the Khabur to Mari and up the Euphrates from there to Karchemish. For a time they also controlled the Assyrian territories of the Upper Tigris and its headwaters at Nineveh, Erbil, Assur, and Nuzi. Their allies included Kishwatna in southeastern Anatolia, Mukish, which stretched between Ugarit and Qatna west of the Orontes to the sea, and the Nia, which controlled the east bank of the Orontes from Alalat down through Aleppo, Ebla and Hama to Qatna and Kadesh. To the east, they had good relations with the Kassites. The land of Mitanni in northern Syria extended from the Taurus Mountains to its west and as far east as Nuzi and the river Tigris in the east. In the south, it extended from Aleppo across to Mari on the Euphrates in the east. Its center was in the Khabur River Valley, with two capitals, Tate and Washukani, called Taitu and Asukana respectively in Assyrian sources. Washukani was located in Tel Fikari as recent German archaeological excavations suggest. The whole area supported agriculture without artificial irrigation and cattle, sheep and goats were raised. It is very similar to Assyria in climate, and was settled by both indigenous Hurrian and Amharitic-speaking populations. People. The ethnicity of the people of Mitanni is difficult to ascertain. A treatise on the training of chariot horses by Kikuli, a Mitanni writer, contains a number of Indo-Aryan glosses. Kamenuper suggested that this vocabulary was derived from the still undivided Indo-Iranian language, but Meyerhofer has shown that specifically Indo-Aryan features are present. The names of the Mitanni aristocracy frequently are of Indo-Aryan origin, and their deities also show Indo-Aryan roots. These Indo-Aryan deities are listed in two treaties between Mitanni and Hatti from Hattusa, and the kings involved are Sadiwaza of Mitanni and Sapululium of the Hittite. The British Museum considers these documents as being from a date around 1350 BC. The common people's language, the Hurrian language, is neither Indo-European nor Semitic. Hurrian is related to Urartian, the language of Urartu, both belonging to the Hurro-Urartian language family. It had been held that nothing more can be deduced from current evidence. A Hurrian passage in the Amarna letters, usually composed in Akkadian, the lingua franca of the day, indicates that the royal family of Mitanni was by then speaking Hurrian as well. Bearers of names in the Hurrian language are attested in wide areas of Syria and the northern Levant that are clearly outside the area of the political entity known to Assyria as Hanigalbat. There is no indication that these persons owed allegiance to the political entity of Mitanni, although the German term Auslandsverräter has been used by some authors. In the 14th century BC, numerous city-states in northern Syria and Canaan were ruled by persons with Hurrian and some Indo-Aryan names. If this can be taken to mean that the population of these states was Hurrian as well, then it is possible that these entities were a part of a larger polity with a shared Hurrian identity. This is often assumed, but without a critical examination of the sources. Differences in dialect and regionally different pantheons point to the existence of several groups of Hurrian speakers. History. No native sources for the history of Mitanni have been found so far. The account is mainly based on Assyrian, Hittite, and Egyptian sources, as well as inscriptions from nearby places in Syria. Often it is not even possible to establish synchronicity between the rulers of different countries and cities, let alone give uncontested absolute dates. The definition and history of Mitanni is further beset by a lack of differentiation between linguistic, ethnic and political groups. Summary. It is believed that the warring Hurrian tribes and city-states became united under one dynasty after the collapse of Babylon due to its sacking by Hittite king Mursili I, and the Kassite invasion. The Hittite conquest of Aleppo, the weak Middle Assyrian kings who succeeded Puzur-Ashur III, and the internal strife of the Hittites had created a power vacuum in Upper Mesopotamia. This led to the formation of the Kingdom of Mitanni. The first known use of Indo-Aryan names for Mitanni rulers begins with Shuturna I, who succeeded his father Kirta on the throne. King Baraturna of Mitanni expanded the kingdom west to Aleppo and made the Amorite king Idrami of Alalak his vassal, and 5 generations seems to separate this king from the rise of Mitanni kingdom. The state of Kizzuwatna in the west also shifted its allegiance to Mitanni, and Assyria in the east had become largely a Mitannian vassal state by the mid-15th century BC. The nation grew stronger during the reign of Shashtatar, but the Hurrians were keen to keep the Hittites inside the Anatolian highland. Kizzuwatna in the west and Ishua in the north were important allies against the hostile Hittites. After a few successful clashes with the Egyptians over the control of Syria, Mitanni sought peace with them, and an alliance was formed. During the reign of Shuturna II, in the early 14th century BC, the relationship was very amicable, and he sent his daughter Hilu-Hepa to Egypt for a marriage with Pharaoh Amenhotep III. Mitanni was now at its peak of power. However, by the reign of Hanigalbat, Mitanni influence over Assyria was on the wane. Hanigalbat became involved in a dynastic battle between Tushratta and his brother Artatama II, and after this his son Shuturna II, who called himself king of the Hurri while seeking support from the Assyrians. A pro-Hurri/Assyria faction appeared at the royal Mitanni court. Hanigalbat had thus loosened Mitanni influence over Assyria, and in turn had now made Assyria an influence over Mitanni affairs. King Ashur-uballit I of Assyria attacked Shuturna and annexed Mitanni territory in the middle of the 14th century BC, making Assyria once more a great power. At the death of Shuturna, Mitanni was ravaged by a war of succession. Eventually Tushratta, a son of Shuturna, ascended the throne, but the kingdom had been weakened considerably and both the Hittite and Assyrian threats increased. At the same time, the diplomatic relationship with Egypt went cold, the Egyptians fearing the growing power of the Hittites and Assyrians. The Hittite king Sepalulium I invaded the Mitanni vassal states in northern Syria and replaced them with loyal subjects. In the capital Washukani, a new power struggle broke out. The Hittites and the Assyrians supported different pretenders to the throne. Finally, a Hittite army conquered the capital Washukani and installed Shadiwaza, the son of Tushratta, as their vassal king of Mitanni in the late 14th century BC. The kingdom had by now been reduced to the Khabur Valley. The Assyrians had not given up their claim on Mitanni, and in the 13th century BC, Shalmaneser I annexed the kingdom. Early Kingdom. As early as Akkadian times, Hurrians are known to have lived east of the river Tigris on the northern rim of Mesopotamia, and in the Khabur Valley. The group which became Mitanni gradually moved south into Mesopotamia before the 17th century BC. If we trust in one hypothesis on the beginnings of Mitanni, it was already a powerful kingdom at the end of the 17th century or in the first half of the 16th century BC, and its beginnings date to well before the time of Thutmose I, dating actually to the time of the Hittite sovereigns Hattusili I and Mursili I. Hurrians are mentioned in the private Nuzi texts, in Ugarit, and the Hittite archives in Hattusa. Cuneiform texts from Mari mention rulers of city-states in Upper Mesopotamia with both Amurru and Hurrian names. Rulers with Hurrian names are also attested for Ursum and Hassam, and tablets from Alalak mention people with Hurrian names at the mouth of the Orontes. There is no evidence for any invasion from the northeast. Generally, these onomastic sources have been taken as evidence for a Hurrian expansion to the south and the west. A Hittite fragment, probably from the time of Mursili I, mentions a king of the Hurrians. This terminology was last used for King Tushratta of Mitanni, in a letter in the Amarna archives. The normal title of the king was King of the Hurri men. It is believed that the warring Hurrian tribes and city-states became united under one dynasty after the collapse of Babylon due to the Hittite sack by Mursili I and the Kassid invasion. The Hittite conquest of Aleppo, the weak Middle Assyrian kings, and the internal strifes of the Hittites had created a power vacuum in Upper Mesopotamia. This led to the formation of the Kingdom of Mitanni. The legendary founder of the Mitannian dynasty was a king called Kirta, who was followed by a king Shuturna. Nothing is known about these early kings. Baraturna, Parshatar. King Baraturna is known from a cuneiform tablet in Nuzi and an inscription by Idrami of Alalak. Egyptian sources do not mention his name. That he was the king of Naharin whom Thutmose III fought against in the 15th century BC can only be deduced from assumptions. Whether Parshatar, known from another Nuzi inscription, is the same as Baraturna, or a different king, is debated. This king, also known as Paratarna, is considered, by J. A. Belmonte Marin quoting H. Kleinel, to have reigned, as per Middle chronology, under the rule of Thutmose III. Egyptian troops crossed the Euphrates and entered the core lands of Mitanni. At Megiddo, he fought an alliance of 330 Mitanni princes and tribal leaders under the ruler of Kadesh. See Battle of Megiddo. Mitanni had sent troops as well. Whether this was done because of existing treaties, or only in reaction to a common threat, remains open to debate. The Egyptian victory opened the way north. Thutmose III again waged war in Mitanni in the 33rd year of his rule. The Egyptian army crossed the Euphrates at Karchemish and reached a town called Aran. They sailed down the Euphrates to Amar and then returned home via Mitanni. A hunt for elephants at Lake Nija was important enough to be included in the annals. This was impressive propaganda, but did not lead to any permanent rule. Only the area at the Middle Orontes and Phoenicia became part of Egyptian territory. Victories over Mitanni are recorded from the Egyptian campaigns in Nuhas. Again, this did not lead to permanent territorial gains. Baraturna or his son Shashtatar controlled the North Mitanni interior up to Nuhas, and the coastal territories from Kizzuwatna to Alalak in the kingdom of Mukish at the mouth of the Orontes. Idrami of Alalak, returning from Egyptian exile, could only ascend his throne with Baraturna's consent. While he got to rule Mukish and Amau, Aleppo remained with Mitanni. Shashtatar, king of Mitanni, sacked the Assyrian capital of Assur sometime in the 15th century during the reign of Nu'a-Ili, and took the silver and golden doors of the royal palace to Washukani. This is known from a later Hittite document, the Sapalilium Ashadiwaza Treaty. After the sack of Assur, Assyria may have paid tribute to Mitanni up to the time of Hurrian-Adad I. There is no trace of that in the Assyrian king lists, therefore it is probable that Ashur was ruled by a native Assyrian dynasty owing sporadic allegiance to the house of Shashtatar. While a sometime vassal of Mitanni, the Temple of Sin and Shamash was built in Ashur. The states of Aleppo in the west, and Nuzi and Arapha in the east, seem to have been incorporated into Mitanni under Shashtatar as well. The palace of the crown prince, the governor of Arapha, has been excavated. A letter from Shashtatar was discovered in the house of Shilwade-Shup. His seal shows heroes and winged geniuses fighting lions and other animals, as well as a winged sun. This style, with a multitude of figures distributed over the whole of the available space, is taken as typically Hurrian. A second seal, belonging to Shuturna I, but used by Shashtatar, found in Alalak, shows a more traditional Assyro-Akkadian style. The military superiority of Mitanni was probably based on the use of two-wheeled war chariots, driven by the Marjanu people. A text on the training of war horses, written by a certain Kikuli the Mitannian, has been found in the archives recovered at Hattusa. More speculative is the attribution of the introduction of the chariot in Mesopotamia to early Mitanni. During the reign of Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep II, Mitanni seems to have regained influence in the Middle Orontes Valley that had been conquered by Thutmose I. Amenhotep fought in Syria in 1425 BC, presumably against Mitanni as well, but did not reach the Euphrates. Artatama I and Shuturna II. Later on, Egypt and Mitanni became allies, and King Shuturna II himself was received at the Egyptian court. Amicable letters, sumptuous gifts, and letters asking for sumptuous gifts were exchanged. Mitanni was especially interested in Egyptian gold. This culminated in a number of royal marriages. The daughter of King Artatama I was married to Thutmose IV. Kilu-Hepa, or Gilu-Kipa, the daughter of Shuturna II, was married to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who ruled in the early 14th century BC. In a later royal marriage, Tadu-Hepa, or Tadu-Kipa, the daughter of Tushratta, was sent to Egypt. When Amenhotep III fell ill, the king of Mitanni sent him a statue of the goddess Shashka of Nineveh that was reputed to cure diseases. A more or less permanent border between Egypt and Mitanni seems to have existed near Khatna on the Orontes River. Ugarit was part of Egyptian territory. The reason Mitanni sought peace with Egypt may have been trouble with the Hittites. A Hittite king called Tudaliya conducted campaigns against Kizzuwatna, Eretsawa, Ishua, Aleppo, and maybe against Mitanni itself. Kizzuwatna may have fallen to the Hittites at that time. Artashumara and Tushratta. Artashumara followed his father Shuturna II on the throne, but was murdered by a certain Ud-Hai, or Udi. It is uncertain what intrigues that followed, but Ud-Hai then placed Tushratta, another son of Shuturna, on the throne. Probably, he was quite young at the time and was intended to serve as a figurehead only. However, he managed to dispose of the murderer, possibly with the help of his Egyptian father-in-law, but this is sheer speculation. The Egyptians may have suspected the mighty days of Mitanni were about to end. In order to protect their Syrian border zone, the new pharaoh Akhenaten instead received envoys from the resurgent powers of the Hittites and Assyria. From the Amarna letters it is known that Tushratta's desperate claim for a gold statue from Akhenaten developed into a major diplomatic crisis. The unrest weakened the Mitannian control of their vassal states, and Aziru of Amuru seized the opportunity and made a secret deal with the Hittite king Sapalilium I. Kizzuwatna, which had seceded from the Hittites, was reconquered by Sapalilium I. In what has been called his first Syrian campaign, Suppiluliuma then invaded the western Euphrates Valley, and conquered the Amurru and Nuhas and Mitanni. According to the later Suppiluliuma-Shadiwaza treaty, Suppiluliuma had made a treaty with Artatama II, a rival of Tushratta. Nothing is known of this Artatama's previous life or connection, if any, to the royal family. He is called King of the Hurri, while Tushratta went by the title King of Mitanni. This must have disagreed with Tushratta. Suppiluliuma began to plunder the lands on the west bank of the Euphrates, and annexed Mount Lebanon. Tushratta threatened to raid beyond the Euphrates if even a single lamb or kid was stolen. By the reign of Hurrian-speaking I, Mitanni influence over Assyria was on the wane. Hurrian-speaking I became involved in a dynastic battle between Tushratta and his brother Artatama II, and after this his son Shuturna III, who called himself King of the Hurri while seeking support from the Assyrians. A pro-Hurri/Assyria faction appeared at the royal Mitanni court. Hurrian-speaking I had thus loosened Mitanni influence over Assyria, and in turn had now made Assyria an influence over Mitanni affairs. Suppiluliuma then recounts how the land of Ishua on the upper Euphrates had seceded in the time of his grandfather. Attempts to conquer it had failed. In the time of his father, other cities had rebelled. Suppiluliuma claims to have defeated them, but the survivors had fled to the territory of Ishua, that must have been part of Mitanni. A clause to return fugitives is part of many treaties between sovereign states and between rulers and vassal states, so perhaps the harboring of fugitives by Ishua formed the pretext for the Hittite invasion. A Hittite army crossed the border, entered Ishua and returned the fugitives to Hittite rule. I freed the lands that I captured, they dwelt in their places. All the people whom I released rejoined their peoples, and Hatti incorporated their territories. The Hittite army then marched through various districts towards Washukani. Suppiluliuma claims to have plundered the area, and to have brought loot, captives, cattle, sheep and horses back to Hatti. He also claims that Tushratta fled, though obviously he failed to capture the capital. While the campaign weakened Mitanni, it did not endanger its existence. In a second campaign, the Hittites again crossed the Euphrates and subdued Aleppo, Mukish, Nia, Arahati, Apina, and Katna, as well as some cities whose names have not been preserved. The booty from Arahati included charioteers, who were brought to Hatti together with all their possessions. While it was common practice to incorporate enemy soldiers in the army, this might point to a Hittite attempt to counter the most potent weapon of Mitanni, the war chariots, by building up or strengthening their own chariot forces. All in all, Suppiluliuma claims to have conquered the lands from Mount Lebanon and from the far bank of the Euphrates. But Hittite governors or vassal rulers are mentioned only for some cities and kingdoms. While the Hittites made some territorial gains in western Syria, it seems unlikely that they established a permanent rule east of the Euphrates. Shadiwaza, Kurdiwaza. A son of Tushratta conspired with his subjects, and killed his father in order to become king. His brother Shadiwaza was forced to flee. In the unrest that followed, the Assyrians asserted themselves under Ashur-uballit I, and he invaded the country. The pretender Artatama/Atratama II gained ascendancy, followed by his son Shuturna. Suppiluliuma claims that the entire land of Mitanni went to ruin, and the land of Assyria and the land of Alshi divided it between them, but this sounds more like wishful thinking. Although Assyria annexed Mitanni territory, the kingdom survived. Shuturna wisely maintained good relations with Assyria, and returned to it the palace doors of Ashur, that had been taken by Shashtatar. Such booty formed a powerful political symbol in ancient Mesopotamia. The fugitive Shadiwaza may have gone to Babylon first, but eventually ended up at the court of the Hittite king, who married him to one of his daughters. The treaty between Suppiluliuma of Hatti and Shadiwaza of Mitanni has been preserved and is one of the main sources on this period. After the conclusion of the Suppiluliuma-Shadiwaza treaty, Hattusili, a son of Suppiluliuma, led a Hittite army into Mitanni. According to Hittite sources, Hattusili and Shadiwaza crossed the Euphrates at Carchemish, then marched against Eridu and Hurrian territory. They sent messengers from the west bank of the Euphrates and seemed to have expected a friendly welcome, but the people were loyal to their new ruler, influenced, as Suppiluliuma claims, by the riches of Tushratta. Why are you coming? If you are coming for battle, come, but you shall not return to the land of the great king. They taunted. Shuturna had sent men to strengthen the troops and chariots of the district of Eridu, but the Hittite army won the battle, and the people of Eridu sued for peace. Meanwhile, An Assyrian army led by a single charioteer marched on the capital Washukani. It seems that Shuturna had sought Assyrian aid in the face of the Hittite threat. Possibly the force sent did not meet his expectations, or he changed his mind. In any case, the Assyrian army was refused entrance, and set instead to besiege the capital. This seems to have turned the mood against Shuturna. Perhaps the majority of the inhabitants of Washukani decided they were better off with the Hittite Empire than with their former subjects. In any case, a messenger was sent to Mursili and Shadiwaza at Eridu, who delivered his message in public, at the city gate. Mursili and Shadiwaza marched on Washukani, and the cities of Haran and Pakaripa seemed to have surrendered to them. While at Pakaripa, a desolate country where the troops suffered hunger, they received word of an Assyrian advance, but the enemy never materialized. The allies pursued the retreating Assyrian troops to Nalap-Ini but could not force a confrontation. The Assyrians seemed to have retreated home in the face of the superior force of the Hittites. Shadiwaza became king of Mitanni, but after Suppiluliuma had taken Carchemish and the land west of the Euphrates, that were governed by his son Mursili, Mitanni was restricted to the Khabur River and Balik River valleys, and became more and more dependent on their allies in Hattusili. Some scholars speak of a Hittite puppet kingdom, a buffer state against the powerful Assyria. Assyria under Ashur-uballit I began to infringe on Mitanni as well. Its vassal state of Nuzi east of the Tigris was conquered and destroyed. According to the Hittitologist Trevor R. Bryce, Mitanni was permanently lost to Assyria during the reign of Mursili III of the Hittites, who was defeated by the Assyrians in the process. Its loss was a major blow to Hittite prestige in the ancient world and undermined the young king's authority over his kingdom. Shatwara I. The royal inscriptions of the Assyrian king Adad-nirari I relate how the vassal king Shatwara of Mitanni rebelled and committed hostile acts against Assyria. How this Shatwara was related to the dynasty of Partatama is unclear. Some scholars think that he was the second son of Artatama II, and the brother of Shadiwaza's one-time rival Shuturna. Adad-nirari claims to have captured King Shatwara and brought him to Ashur, where he took an oath as a vassal. Afterwards, he was allowed to return to Mitanni, where he paid Adad-nirari regular tribute. This must have happened during the reign of the Hittite king Mursili II, but there is no exact date. Wasashata. Despite Assyrian strength, Shatwara's son Wasashata attempted to rebel. He sought Hittite help, but that kingdom was preoccupied with internal struggles, possibly connected with the usurpation of Hattusili III, who had driven his nephew Urid-Shup into exile. The Hittites took Wasashata's money but did not help, as Adad-nirari's inscriptions gleefully note. The Assyrians expanded further, and conquered the royal city of Tadu, and took Washukani, Amasaku, Kahat, Shuru, Nabula, Hora and Shutagu as well. They conquered Eridu, destroyed it utterly and sowed salt over it. The wife, sons and daughters of Wasashata were taken to Ashur, together with much booty and other prisoners. As Wasashata himself is not mentioned, he must have escaped capture. There are letters of Wasashata in the Hittite archives. Some scholars think he became ruler of a reduced Mitanni state called Shubria. While Adad-nirari I conquered the Mitanni heartland between the Balik and the Khabur from the Hittites, he does not seem to have crossed the Euphrates, and Carchemish remained part of the Hittite kingdom. With his victory over Mitanni, Adad-nirari claimed the title of Great King in letters to the Hittite rulers. Shatwara II. In the reign of Shalmaneser I, King Shatwara of Mitanni, a son or nephew of Wasahata, rebelled against the Assyrian yoke with the help of the Hittites and the nomadic Alamu around 1250 BC. His army was well prepared. They had occupied all the mountain passes and waterholes, so that the Assyrian army suffered from thirst during their advance. Nevertheless, Shalmaneser I won a crushing victory for Assyria over the Hittites and Mitanni. He claims to have slain 14,400 men, the rest were blinded and carried away. His inscriptions mention the conquest of 9 fortified temples, 180 Hurrian cities were turned into rubble mounds, and Shalmaneser slaughtered like sheep the armies of the Hittites and the Alamu his allies. The cities from Tadu to Eridu were captured, as well as all of Mount Kashiar to Aluhat and the fortresses of Sudu and Haranu to Carchemish on the Euphrates. Another inscription mentions the construction of a temple to the Assyrian god Adad/Hadad in Kahat, a city of Mitanni that must have been occupied as well. Hanigalbat is an Assyrian province. A part of the population was deported and served as cheap labor. Administrative documents mention barley allotted to uprooted men, deportees from Mitanni. For example, the Assyrian governor of the city Nar, Melisa, received barley to be distributed to deported persons from Shudau as seed, food for their oxen and for themselves. The Assyrians built the line of frontier fortifications against the Hittites on the Balik River. Mitanni was now ruled by the Assyrian Grand Vizier Ilipata, a member of the royal family, who took the title of King of Hanigalbat. He resided in the newly built Assyrian administrative center at Tel Sabi Abiad, governed by the Assyrian steward Tamit. Assyrians maintained not only military and political control, but seem to have dominated trade as well, as no Hurrian or Mitanni names appear in private records of Shalmaneser's time. Under the Assyrian king Tukulti-Ninurta I there were again numerous deportations from Hanigalbat to Ashur, probably in connection with the construction of a new palace. As the royal inscriptions mention an invasion of Hanigalbat by a Hittite king, there may have been a new rebellion, or at least native support of a Hittite invasion. The Mitanni towns may have been sacked at this time, as destruction levels have been found in some excavations that cannot be dated with precision, however. Tel Sabi Abiad, seat of the Assyrian government in Mitanni in the times of Shalmaneser, was deserted between 1200 and 1150 BC. In the time of Ashur-Nirari III, the Phrygians and others invaded and destroyed the Hittite Empire, already weakened by defeats against Assyria. Some parts of Assyrian-ruled Hanigalbat was temporarily lost to the Phrygians also, however, the Assyrians defeated the Phrygians and regained these colonies. The Hurrians still held Katmahu and Papu. In the transitional period to the early Iron Age, Mitanni was settled by invading Arameans.